The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains, casting soft golden patterns across the worn wooden floor of her Illinois home. Martha sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee, savoring the quiet. At 72, her days were simple, measured in the rhythm of tending her small garden, feeding the birds and knitting scarves for winter. But today, the air felt heavy, as though the walls themselves sensed the tension that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. Her daughter, Emily, had always been a tempest, a whirlwind of beauty, ambition, and, lately, disdain. Martha had watched her grow, nurturing her through scraped knees, broken hearts, and late night cries over school exams. Every birthday, every school recital, every small triumph had been celebrated with Martha's unwavering devotion. She had given everything, love, time, and patience. Yet, despite the sacrifices, she had never seen this coming. Emily burst into the kitchen with her usual dramatic flair, tossing her designer bag onto the chair. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned the room with barely concealed irritation. "Mom," she began, her voice dripping with impatience, "I can't believe you still do this." Martha's brow furrowed. "Do what, dear?" she asked cautiously, her heart fluttering with unease. Emily smirked, leaning against the counter as if she owned the space. "Who needs a useless worm like you?" Her words hit Martha like a thunderclap. The coffee trembled in her hands, spilling a drop onto the table. For a moment she couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The woman who had once cradled this same child in her arms, who had stayed awake through fevers and heartbreaks, was now dismissed in a single, cruel sentence. Tears blurred Martha's vision, but they weren't just tears of hurt. They were the culmination of years of silent sacrifices, of whispered reassurances, of invisible labor unnoticed and unappreciated. She had given her daughter the world, and in return she was spat upon with contempt. Yet beneath the hurt something stirred. A spark, a small, flickering ember of resolve, ignited within her chest. She refused to crumble, refused to let this insult define her. As Emily's laughter echoed down the hallway, Martha wiped her tears and straightened her spine. This was not the end. Somehow, someday, she would reclaim her dignity, not with anger or rashness, but with a quiet, deliberate strength. The betrayal cut deep, but it also awakened a part of her she had long forgotten. The part that refused to be crushed, the part that knew that even the smallest worm could turn the tide when pushed too far. Martha's heart still ached, but the ember glowed brighter. The story of her daughter's cruelty had only begun, and so had hers. The days after Emily's cruel words stretched into a heavy, suffocating fog. Martha wandered through her home as if seeing it for the first time, her gaze lingering on the photographs lining the walls, smiling faces, frozen in happier times. She saw herself at Emily's piano recital, hands trembling as she clapped, herself at the hospital, holding Emily's hand through a surgery scar, herself always there, always giving. And yet, despite every sacrifice, her daughter had dismissed her as a useless worm. Martha tried to speak with Emily, to reason, to plead, but the words lodged in her throat. Each attempt met with impatience or derision. She began to retreat into herself, spending long hours in her small garden, fingers in the soil, heart in turmoil. Anger simmered quietly beneath the surface, mingled with an aching sorrow she hadn't expected to feel at her age. She questioned herself endlessly. Had she failed as a mother? Had all those years of devotion been meaningless? And then, slowly, a change occurred. She began to notice cracks in Emily's perfect exterior, the subtle manipulations, the self-centered behavior, the way she relied on charm rather than effort to get what she wanted. Martha's grief transformed into awareness, and awareness into resolve. She realized that the power she had lost was not gone. It had only been buried under the weight of unconditional love. Now it was time to reclaim it, Martha began keeping notes, quietly observing Emily's habits, her interactions with friends, her little hypocrisies that only a mother could notice. She didn't rush or act rashly. Instead, she let patience guide her. Every forgotten promise, every unkind word, every selfish act became a thread in a web she would one day weave with precision. Yet Martha's plan was not born of bitterness. She wanted no chaotic destruction, no public shaming. Her revenge, she decided, would be elegant, measured, subtle, and impossible to blame on anyone but Emily herself. There was a beauty in justice served quietly, a poetry in watching someone face the consequences of their own choices. In the evenings, Martha would sit by the window, knitting quietly while her mind spun elaborate scenarios. Each step of her plan was calculated, each move designed to restore her dignity and, in some small way, open Emily's eyes to the hurt she had caused. By the time the first frost touched the edges of the garden, Martha's sorrow had hardened into determination. She no longer saw herself as a discarded parent, but as a woman armed with insight, patience, and an unshakable sense of her own worth. Emily had thought she had power over her mother, but Martha now knew the truth. The greatest strength often lies in the quietest, most unassuming hearts, and hers was about to awaken. Martha moved carefully, like a chess player setting pieces across the board, each step deliberate and measured. She did not rush, for patience had become her greatest ally. Emily, confident in her assumed superiority, never suspected that her mother, the useless worm, was quietly preparing a reckoning. It began in small ways. Martha subtly reminded Emily's friends of commitments the young woman had neglected. She dropped casual yet pointed observations about Emily's failed promises, always framed as concern, never accusation. Friends began to notice inconsistencies, the cracks in the image Emily had carefully curated. Whispers spread, questions arose, and the young woman who had once commanded admiration now faced puzzled stares and quiet disappointment from those she cared about. Martha also reached out to Emily's professional circle, offering help where her daughter had failed. She shared advice, offered contacts, and assisted quietly behind the scenes. Soon, Emily's colleagues began to realize the gaps in her competence. She had relied for years on charm and borrowed credibility, but the truth, illuminated by her mother's subtle interventions, began to surface. The elegance of Martha's revenge lay not in cruelty, but in exposure. She never raised her voice, never confronted Emily directly. Instead, she let her daughter's own actions, the lies, the carelessness, the thoughtlessness, speak for themselves. It was poetic justice. Emily, so proud and so dismissive, was now witnessing the consequences of her behavior reflected back at her from every direction. Meanwhile, Martha's quiet confidence blossomed into a serene joy. She started attending local community events, reconnecting with old friends, and even volunteering at the library, rediscovering a sense of purpose she had long forgotten. Every time Emily faced a small setback or embarrassment, Martha's satisfaction was tempered not by glee, but by a deep understanding of balance and justice. She had regained her power, not by confrontation, but through wisdom and patience. The most remarkable moment came when Emily, frustrated and confused by her dwindling social influence and professional missteps, finally questioned herself. She felt the absence of the unwavering support she had once taken for granted. It was subtle, quiet, yet unmistakable. Martha did not need to speak. The realization was in the air, in the disappointed glances and the unanswered calls she had once ignored. Martha, once heartbroken and humiliated, now felt a sense of vindication and liberation. She had proven, without raising her voice, that love and intelligence could overcome cruelty and arrogance. Her revenge was sweet not because it punished Emily harshly, but because it illuminated the truth quietly, elegantly, and irrevocably. Martha had transformed from the useless worm into a force of quiet justice, and in the process, she had reclaimed something far more precious, herself. Winter settled over Illinois, frosting the edges of Martha's garden and coating quiet streets in a silvery hush. The world outside seemed to slow, mirroring the calm that had finally begun to settle within her. She sat in her favorite armchair by the window, knitting a soft scarf, but her mind wandered to the months past the betrayal, the heartbreak, the careful, deliberate reclaiming of her dignity. She had endured, she had observed, and she had acted, and now she felt a sense of peace she had not thought possible. Emily no longer dominated Martha's thoughts with the sharp sting of insult. The subtle justice Martha had orchestrated had taken effect, revealing the cracks in her daughter's self-assured world. Martha's heart no longer carried the weight of bitterness. Instead, it held a quiet satisfaction, a knowledge that she had faced cruelty without compromising her grace. She had not sought revenge out of hatred, but out of necessity, an assertion of her own worth. Life, Martha realized, was too fleeting to waste on resentment. She began reconnecting with old friends she had long neglected, sharing stories and laughter that warmed the soul. She attended community gatherings, joined a book club, and volunteered at the local senior center. Each new connection reinforced what she had already known deep down. Her life was valuable, her presence mattered, and she was capable of joy independent of her daughter's opinion. Emily, confronted with the subtle consequences of her arrogance and carelessness, began to falter. Invitations she expected did not arrive. Opportunities she assumed were guaranteed slipped away. Slowly, reluctantly, she began to understand the impact of her words and actions. Martha did not gloat. She offered only quiet, dignified distance, letting the lessons sink in naturally. The true power of her revenge was not in humiliation, but in revelation, allowing Emily to face herself, finally, without Martha needing to strike directly. Martha's heart, once bruised and broken, had grown stronger. She no longer defined herself by the love she had given or the cruelty she had suffered. She defined herself by her resilience, her integrity, and her capacity to create a meaningful life, even after betrayal. Each day brought a renewed sense of freedom, a life lived for herself, not in the shadow of someone else's contempt. As spring approached, Martha stood in her garden, sunlight warming her face. The plants she had nurtured through frost now showed signs of bloom, a living testament to her patience and care. She smiled softly, knowing that while Emily's world had shifted, hers had expanded. The story of the useless worm had ended not in despair, but in triumph, quiet, measured, and deeply, irrevocably sweet. Martha finally understood. Love, wisdom, and patience could overcome even the deepest betrayal. And in reclaiming herself, she had discovered the truest revenge of all.